1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. It's the reason we're doing this little series at the moment. It says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. We're doing a little series called The Reason Why. In my experience, when people ask that question, why do you believe what you believe? They don't tend to be asking for a sermon or a deep theological response. Most often, they have spotted something about you, something different, something hopeful. And they want to know how you got to be you. What makes you you? And what makes you you is your story. It's personal. It's individual. It's your very own reason why. So today, if you will indulge me a little bit, instead of a sermon, I'm going to share a little bit of my story and my reason why, and hopefully you find it helpful. Like lots of you, I was born into privilege. Privileged in many ways, but one of those ways is that my immediate and my wider family were Christians. Faith and church were a huge part of what we did growing up. I guess we would have been referred to as a religious family. Being in and around church was a priority for us. And as children, as you can imagine, we didn't really have very much choice in that. Church was quite a prescriptive place to be. It mattered what was said, and it mattered what was worn. Conforming to what was right and behaving in a certain way was important. That certain way was both taught and expected, and lots of things seemed pretty non-negotiable. At times it could feel a little bit us and them. If you were in church, you were in, but there was a certain way that you should be in. Fitting in was modelled to us, and fitting in was really important. And lots of people in that kind of situation and circumstance found themselves kind of rebelling against the system and the culture. But for me, it was quite the opposite. I really wanted to fit in. I wanted to conform. I knew my Bible stories. I knew to get baptised. I knew what people told me was right and wrong. I knew church. I knew church culture. But to be honest, I didn't know Jesus. It's so easy to be in and around culture, isn't it? It's so easy even just to fit in and even be part of it. But we're not called to fit in. We're called to follow. We're not called to fit in. We're called to follow. I loved my church growing up, and I loved the people in church. But I'm not sure that I knew and loved Jesus. I knew church. I needed Jesus. I knew church. I needed Jesus. As I grew older, church culture wasn't enough for me by itself. It was fine for Sundays, but it didn't really impact my life very much outside of that. And then I met some people through a new church, and I went to a summer camp. Some of you have heard of it, called Hill House. And I noticed and I observed something different about these people, something special. They had a personal relationship with Jesus that really fascinated me. Having spent a week with them and myself kind of personally encountering the person of Jesus through worship and prayer and teaching and understanding there's something more of God's Holy Spirit, it dawned on me that I really did want to follow Jesus and become more like him. I'd spent the formative years in my church trying to fit in. Then I had a light bulb moment. I wasn't supposed to fit in. I was supposed to stand out. Being a follower of Jesus isn't about conforming. We are called to be different. We are called to be different. I was okay at following Jesus on Sundays. But that summer I was exposed to the reality that following Jesus isn't just a Sunday gig. On the cross, Jesus gave everything for me. Jesus didn't give everything for me just to have me following him on Sundays. I was half-hearted in my faith. I didn't really realise it at the time, but I kind of had a foot in both camps, trying to have the best of both worlds. But Jesus doesn't call us to follow him half-heartedly. He calls us to follow him wholeheartedly. I was a part-time Christian, but following Jesus is a full-time role. I was a part-time Christian. Following Jesus is a full-time role. I had this amazing week. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced something like that, where you kind of don't want it to end. You want it to last forever. It felt like being in like an amazing spiritual bubble, like holy ground. And going back to normal life, which was a lovely normal life, I might add, it kind of felt like it might ruin everything. And quite honestly, it left me a little bit scared. But in that place of fear, I felt God speak to me through a Bible verse for the very first time. Someone was praying for me, and they prayed the words of Joshua chapter 1 and verse 9 over me. It's become a bit of a life Bible verse for me. It says, "This is my command. Don't be afraid. Be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you always." My mind was blown. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in church and I knew the Bible pretty well, but it had never come alive and spoken to me before. As we mentioned in the family talk, we have this incredible tool to help us live life. God's spoken word, his guidebook, his manual, his instruction for life. And suddenly the Bible wasn't something that I memorized to get prizes. It was something that spoke directly into a situation that I was facing exactly as I needed it to. It was like that Bible verse was written just for me. God knew that I was scared. God knew that I didn't want to get back to real life. And in that place, he encouraged me that he would go with me. Not just home, not just back to school, but he was with me all of the time. And hearing from God, I realised that I wasn't supposed to just follow Jesus on Sundays or at summer camp. I wanted to follow him wherever he wanted me to go. I wanted to do whatever he wanted me to do. I understood that week that Jesus had died for me. He had chosen me. And that week I chose him too. I chose to make him Lord of my life. Now, Lord is a bit of a strange word for us, isn't it? But put simply, that is about making something or someone the most important thing in your life. Matthew 22 records Jesus telling his followers that the best thing they can do is love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, and soul. Around age 6, I prayed a prayer to give my life to Jesus. Around age 10, I was baptised. But it wasn't until that day, as a teenager, that I really chose Jesus and I chose to follow him. I had inherited faith, but now I needed to own it. So I knew all about Jesus, and now I had chosen to follow Jesus. I could waffle on for ages about lots of different elements of my journey, but I just wanted to focus on one major reason why I still follow Jesus. Many of you will have heard me talk about it before. There is a Bible verse that talks about a peace that transcends understanding. It's in Philippians chapter 4. It talks about such an incredible peace that humanly we cannot fathom it or get our heads around it. It says that this peace guards our hearts and our minds. It sounds amazing, doesn't it? I'd heard about this peace before. This verse is often used while praying for people. I thought this peace sounded lovely, but for me it was a bit obscure. maybe not really something for me. Even as a follower of Jesus, this kind of peace seemed a little bit beyond me. Perhaps it was a bit mystical or mysterious. A peace like this felt like potential, but not my reality. And then as life happened, actually life felt like it was becoming quite a lot like about death, really. Not to be too morbid, but before the time that I was 30, I'd lost various family members all in a relatively short space of time. All my grandparents died, one of my uncles died, one of my best friends committed suicide, and then perhaps most significantly, my mum lost her 8-year battle with cancer. At the time where I felt that I could have been most confused and conflicted about my faith, I actually had the most clarity. Where God could have felt the most distant, our relationship suddenly felt deeper. Not because I was reading my Bible loads or praying more than usual, although lots of people were holding our family in their prayers. Not because I was engaging in incredible times of worship or listening to profound Bible teaching, but because in the valley of the shadow of death, Jesus was more real to me than perhaps he had ever been before. God's incredible peace was with me, not because I earned it or I deserved it, but because it was gifted to me. The most amazing, timely, beautiful gift ever. In a dark and sad place, I felt and I had this unbelievable peace. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't put it into words, but it was real. It was real. Jesus was real. Jesus was my reality. Recently, I was led through a little meditation on Psalm 23. That famous psalm says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." I was reminded of the wonderful comfort and peace that I have felt and found in such dark times. But God also spoke to me. He asked me to think about what his comfort looks like for me in normal life too. I know and I've experienced, had access to this peace, this guidance and this comfort in the valley of the shadow of death. But what does it look like for me on a tricky Tuesday afternoon at home with the kids? What might that incredible peace and comfort and guidance look like for you in normal life too? So to conclude, my reason why is a bit of a journey, like lots of us, I'm sure. Jesus was what I knew and was what I was taught. It was a little bit of my inheritance, I suppose. Jesus then was who I chose to become a true follower of him. It was the most important decision of my life. And then Jesus was and is my reality. When I needed him most, he was the most real he had ever been. The wonderful potential of this Jesus became the most glorious reality for me. So to finish, my encouragement and my challenge to you. Church is great, but you need Jesus. Inherited faith is wonderful, but you need to own it for yourself. You are called to follow Jesus wherever he leads you, doing whatever he wants you to do. And following Jesus is a full-time role. The good news for you is that you don't have to have a glamorous CV or any jazzy qualifications, but it is a full-time role. And in case I haven't made it clear, my reason why is because following Jesus is the best choice that you could ever make.